framed for a destroyed masterpiece and hunted by a ruthless syndicate for her stepfather's debts, Sarah's life was shattered. Then, an enigmatic billionaire stepped from the shadows, offering a deal that felt like a trap. He didn't just save her. He ruthlessly dismantled her tormentors and claimed her as his own. But in this new gilded cage, would she find freedom or a deeper obsession? The scent of turpentine and aged canvas was Seraphina Vance's truest comfort, a balm against the raw, ceaseless ache of her reality. She sat hunched over a canvas in the hushed, forgotten corner of the Obsidian Gallery, her workspace little more than a cramped alcove tucked behind the sprawling main hall. Fluorescent lights, unforgiving and stark, hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on her meticulous hands. On the other side of a flimsy sound-dampening screen, the gallery buzzed with the hushed reverence of patrons and the clipped, arrogant tones of Alaric Thorne, her boss. He was undoubtedly holding court, taking credit for the meticulously restored Roman mosaic Sarah had spent 3 torturous months piecing back together, its vibrant colors now resurrected under her touch. Then justice was a dull, constant throb behind her ribs, a familiar companion she no longer had the energy to fight. Her current project, a minor landscape from the Dutch Golden Age, lay before her, its varnished surface gleaming under her precision lamp. She held a tiny, almost invisible brush, delicately applying a conservation-grade solvent to lift a century of grime. The faintest whisper of dust motes danced in the light, a silent testament to the gallery's age, yet the air in her nook always felt stale, heavy, a stark contrast to the vast, airy grandeur Alaric flaunted. She traced the brushwork, lost in the delicate dance of light and shadow, the artist's forgotten vision speaking to her across centuries. This was where she found solace, where unparalleled talent could breathe, even as her spirit suffocated. A shrill, tinny ringtone from a cheap burner phone tucked beneath her workbench shattered the fragile piece. Sarah flinched, her hand shaking. No, not now. It was the 11th hour of a Tuesday, already past 9. She knew, with a sickening certainty, who it was. The Black Hand Syndicate. Gregory. Her stepfather, Gregory Vance, a man whose genetic lottery win was squandered on cards and cheap thrills, had long ago mortgaged her future, and by extension her soul. The phone buzzed again, an insistent electric insect against the worn wood. She ignored it, pressing her temples, a dull headache already blooming behind her eyes. Just 5 more minutes, please. Just 5 more minutes of peace. The gallery was Alaric's kingdom, a gleaming palace of stolen beauty and hushed lies. He rarely deigned to enter her small sanctuary, preferring to issue orders from the sterile comfort of his office, his voice a condescending drawl through the intercom. Seraphina, is the Vandal ready for tomorrow's viewing? And ensure that appalling patch on the Rococo portrait is utterly invisible. We have discerning eyes attending. Each command was a fresh cut, a reminder that her worth was purely transactional, her name a forgotten footnote. She was a ghost in the machine, tirelessly preserving the past while her own future crumbled. Appalling patch. Sarah gritted her teeth, remembering the week she'd spent painstakingly reconstructing a section of canvas Alaric himself had carelessly damaged during a drunken tour. He blamed her, of course. Always her. The resentment coiled hot and bitter in her gut, rare, volatile emotion she usually suppressed. Her apartment, a cramped studio in a building whose crumbling facade matched her own fraying spirit, was a testament to her quiet desperation. The journey there was a descent from marble floors to cracked pavement, from hushed elegance to the raw symphony of city grit. The bus groaned, its brakes shrieking, each jolt rattling her already frayed nerves. She stared out the window, watching the neon glow of upscale boutiques give way to the weary, flickering lights of dive bars and bodegas. The damp chill of a late autumn evening seeped through her worn coat, mirroring the pervasive coldness in her heart. The hallway of her building smelled perpetually of stale cooking oil, cheap air freshener, and the unspoken anxieties of its inhabitants. Peeling wallpaper, a ghastly floral pattern, clung stubbornly to the walls. The elevator, a rattling cage of ancient metal, was almost always broken. Sarah took the stairs, her worn sneakers barely making a sound on the dusty concrete. Each flight was a physical manifestation of the uphill battle she fought daily. One more day. Just one more day, Sarah. She whispered it like a prayer, a mantra against the encroaching darkness. Inside her apartment, the air was heavy, stagnant. She flipped on the single overhead light, revealing the familiar landscape of her impoverished existence. A thin mattress on the floor, a makeshift desk overflowing with art books and cheap ramen cups, a single plant valiantly struggling for life on the windowsill. The silence was deafening, yet it buzzed with an unseen threat, the phantom echo of Gregory's booming voice, the memory of the chilling threats from the Black Hand. Her phone vibrated again on the counter, a relentless, insistent buzz. This time, it wasn't just a number. It was a text. A single, ominous word. Tonight. Her blood ran cold. The final payment, the impossible sum, was due tomorrow. But Gregory's creditors, the shadowy figures behind the Black Hand, weren't known for their patience. Tonight. Her mind raced, a terrifying kaleidoscope of scenarios, each one worse than the last. They wouldn't just take her. They would break her. She gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, the cheap laminate cold beneath her trembling fingers. She had nothing left to give, nothing left to sell. Her talent, her passion, her very existence felt like a trap, carefully set, now slowly closing around her. She was a fading masterpiece, destined to be lost to the shadows. And she had nowhere left to run. The scent of antique varnish, usually a comfort, now clung to Sarah like a shroud, heavy with the stench of impending doom. Panic, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, had replaced the familiar ache of resentment. The morning began with a scream, Alaric Thorns, reverberating through the pristine halls of the Obsidian Gallery. Serafina, get in here now. His voice, usually a carefully modulated sneer, was a raw, unfiltered shriek of rage. Sarah, still wiping the lingering traces of solvent from her hands, hurried from her cramped alcove. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of her terror. What now? The air in the main hall crackled with a palpable tension. Staff members, usually bustling with quiet efficiency, stood frozen, their gazes fixed on the centerpiece of the upcoming auction, the priceless Renaissance triptych, The Lament of St. Catherine. And on its central panel, a grotesque, jagged gouge ripped through the serene face of the Madonna. It wasn't just superficial damage. It was an act of brutal vandalism, a deep, intentional violation that tore through the canvas, exposing raw what beneath the ancient paint. Sarah gasped, a sound swallowed by the suffocating silence. The vibrant blues and golds, once radiating divine peace, now screamed with a silent wound. Alaric, his face mottled purple with fury, pivoted to face her. Look at this, you incompetent fool. He gestured wildly at the damaged masterpiece, his manicured finger trembling. 3 million euros. My reputation. Ruined. And it happened on your watch, Serafina. His words sliced through the air, sharp and poisonous. The panel was last in your studio. Only you had access. Humiliation, hot and searing, flooded Sarah's cheeks. Every eye in the gallery, from the junior assistants to the veteran art handlers, was on her. She felt their judgment, their pity, their silent agreement with Alaric's accusations. He was staging a performance, a public execution of her career, and she was the helpless victim. No, this isn't right. I was careful. I'm always careful. The words churned in her mind, desperate and unheard. She knew with absolute certainty that she had not caused this. But Alaric's narrative was already taking root, poisoning the perception of everyone present. I swear, Mr. Thorne, I checked it last night. It was perfect. I was working on the Dutch landscape. The triptych was untouched, she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper against his booming accusation. Her hands, usually so steady, now trembled visibly. Alaric scoffed, a contemptuous sound. Convenient. And now it is irrevocably damaged just hours before the preview? Are you truly so naive, Serafina, to think anyone would believe such a flimsy lie? He leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss, audible only to her. You will fix this. By morning. Or not only will you be jobless, but I will ensure you are legally prosecuted for damages and banned from this industry. You understand? Your career, your meager existence, will be over. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, and the Black Hand will collect what Gregory owes. Dismissed with a contemptuous wave, Sarah retreated, her shoulders hunched, every nerve ending screaming. The stares of her colleagues felt like physical blows. The weight of the accusation was suffocating, pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. Back in her cramped studio, the damaged triptych, now wheeled in by 2 silent porters, dominated the small space. It loomed, a monument to her despair, its ancient beauty mocking her helplessness. She stared at the gouge, a violent scar across the Madonna's face. Impossible. Irreparable in such a short time. Her professional expertise screamed futility, yet the primal need for survival clawed at her. She had to try. She stripped off her jacket, her movements jerky with frantic energy, grabbing her tools. The air was thick with the faint metallic tang of panic and the familiar, comforting scent of chemicals. She pulled on her thin latex gloves, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the tiny vial of binder. Hours blurred into a relentless cycle of assessment, mixing pigments and delicate, almost surgical application. The precise hum of her microscope, the faint click of her heated spatula, the whisper of fine sandpaper against her work surface, normally soothing sounds, now grated on her nerves, each one amplifying the urgency of her task. Sweat beaded on her forehead, trickling down her temples, mingling with stray strand of hair. Her back ached, her eyes burned, but she couldn't stop. Every tremor in her hand, every faltering stroke of the brush, felt like a step closer to the abyss. This is it. This is how it ends. The thought echoed in her mind, a cold, desolate certainty. If she failed, the Black Hand would come. They would take her, not just her freedom, but her very self. She remembered the glint in the eyes of their enforcers, the casual cruelty in their smiles. And Alaric, gloating, would watch her fall. She was trapped, a fragile bird caught in a gilded cage, destined to be crushed. A sudden sharp silence fell over the usually bustling gallery. It wasn't just the natural hush of the late hour. It was an absolute cessation of all sound, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Sarah, hunched over the triptych, her face inches from the damaged canvas, felt it before she heard it. A drop in temperature, a subtle pressure change in the air, a faint, expensive scent, rich, masculine, hinting at old leather and something subtly dangerous, like a predatory animal entering its domain. She slowly straightened, her muscles screaming in protest. Her gaze was drawn, against her will, to the entrance of her studio alcove. Standing there, framed by the pale glow of the main gallery, was a man, not Alaric, who blustered and preened, but a figure of quiet, devastating power. Xander Thorne. He was taller than she remembered from the rare glimpses she'd had of him, his frame lean and elegantly powerful beneath a custom-tailored charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His dark hair, meticulously styled, framed a face carved with sharp, aristocratic angles. But it was his eyes that seized her breath, deep, fathomless pools of dark brown. They held an intensity that was almost predatory, assessing, dissecting, missing nothing. He didn't move, yet he commanded the space, a still point of utter authority. His gaze swept over the damaged triptych, a fleeting flicker of something unreadable in her depths, before they settled on Sarah. The scrutiny was absolute, dissecting her from her worn smock to her trembling hands. It wasn't a glance, it was an invasion, peeling back layers of her composure, laying bare her exhaustion, her desperation, her fear. Sarah felt a flush creep up her neck, a primal instinct to shrink away, to hide from that unflinching gaze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A truly unfortunate incident, wouldn't you agree, Miss Vance? His voice was a low, resonant rumble, a melody of controlled power. It carried a faint, almost imperceptible accent, a hint of something ancient and unyielding, like old stone. He took a single deliberate step into her workspace, and the small room suddenly felt impossibly smaller, charged with his presence. He wasn't just observing, he was claiming the space. Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. I did not cause it, Mr. Thorne. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet she forced the words out, a defiant spark against the overwhelming fear. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched one corner of his lips, not a smile, but a hint of amusement, perhaps at her audacity. He walked slowly around the triptych, his movements fluid and silent, like a shadow. His gloved fingers, long and elegant, hovered inches from the gouge, not touching, but assessing. The fine leather of his gloves was the same rich, dark charcoal as his suit, immaculate. He radiated an aura of dangerous perfection. Indeed, he murmured, his eyes still fixed on the wound in the canvas. One does not accidentally inflict such specific damage. He turned, his gaze snapping back to hers, piercing and intense. But accidents are often convenient, are they not, Miss Vance? He wasn't asking about the triptych. He was asking about her life. About Alaric, about Gregory, about the Black Hand. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He knew. Or at least he suspected. Her breath hitched. A tremor ran through her, a mixture of terror and a terrifying, dangerous surge of hope. Could this man, this formidable, enigmatic Xander Thorne, be her unlikely, terrifying salvation? The thought was a wild, desperate flicker in the encroaching darkness. He took another step closer, his presence utterly overwhelming. The scent of his cologne, subtle yet potent, enveloped her, an intoxicating blend of wood smoke, spice, and something indefinably raw. He leaned down slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers, unwavering. "Tell me, Miss Vance," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a silk-clad threat. "What price does freedom command when you have nothing left to lose?" The question hung in the air, a loaded invitation, a chilling challenge. Sarah felt a dizzying mix of fear and an undeniable, forbidden thrill. She was a fading masterpiece, and he, the collector of rare and dangerous beauty, had just taken a very personal interest. And she knew, with a certainty that both terrified and exhilarated her, that her answer would determine everything. The humiliation of the morning was nothing compared to the public spectacle Alaric orchestrated that afternoon. The gallery, usually a sanctuary of quiet refinement, became Sarah's personal stage of suffering. Alaric, impeccably dressed in a custom-made suit, his smile a cruel slash across his face, addressed a small gathering of staff and a few curious patrons, his voice resonating with feigned regret. "It is with profound disappointment," he began, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces before settling, with chilling precision, on Sarah, who stood trembling near her now empty workstation, "that I must announce the immediate termination of Seraphina Vance. Her regrettable negligence with the lament of St. Catherine has cost this gallery dearly." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle, a poisonous cloud. "Furthermore, the gallery intends to pursue legal action for the considerable damages incurred. We cannot and will not tolerate such egregious professional misconduct." A ripple of hushed whispers followed, each murmur a knife twisting in Sarah's gut. Her face burned, a furious crimson that felt beyond her control. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to expose Alaric's own careless destruction, his blatant deceit, but the words choked in her throat. Her voice, her truth, was irrelevant here. She was a broken instrument in a symphony of lies. The stares felt like physical blows, the pity in some eyes almost worse than the contempt in others. She felt utterly naked, exposed, her meager existence stripped bare for public consumption. "This is it," she thought, a cold certainty settling in her chest. "He's finished me. There's nowhere to go now." Just as Alaric was concluding his damning monologue, a new, far more menacing energy crackled through the air. The polished glass doors of the obsidian gallery swung open, admitting not patrons, but shadows. Gregory Vance, Sarah's stepfather, stumbled in, his eyes wide and bloodshot, a manic desperation etched onto his haggard face. He wasn't alone. Two hulking figures, dressed in cheap, ill-fitting suits that couldn't hide the coiled menace beneath, flanked him. Their faces were devoid of emotion, their eyes hard and calculating. The scent of cheap cologne and something faintly metallic, like old blood, seemed to cling to them. The Black Hand Syndicate. Gregory spotted Sarah, his face briefly contorting into a mask of pathetic relief. "Sarah, there you are. They found me. You have to help me, sweetheart." "They're going to take my fingers," they said. The taller enforcer, a man with a scarred eyebrow and a neck thick as a tree trunk, cut him off with a guttural grunt. His gaze, colder than any winter night, locked onto Sarah. "The debt is due, girlie. Your old man here made promises he couldn't keep. Now the collateral, that's you." His voice was a low growl, devoid of any warmth. He took a step towards her, his hand reaching out, a silent, terrifying promise of what was to come. Sarah froze, a deer caught in headlights. The public humiliation, Alaric's threats, all faded into insignificance before the primal terror that seized her. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow. She could feel the icy touch of desperation, the certainty that this was the end. Alaric, momentarily forgotten, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of smug satisfaction and growing unease. Even he, with all his arrogance, recognized the raw, untamed danger these men represented. But before the enforcer's hand could close around her arm, a subtle shift occurred. It wasn't a grand entrance, no dramatic announcement. It was merely presence. Xander Thorne, who had been observing from the upper mezzanine, now stood at the top of the grand staircase, his earlier silence morphing into an almost tangible aura of command. He didn't speak. He didn't even overtly gesture. Yet, as if on an invisible signal, two men detached themselves from the flow of patrons, blending seamlessly, moving with a quiet, lethal grace. They weren't dressed like typical security. They were tailored, understated, yet their eyes held the same unwavering focus as Xander's. They positioned themselves, not aggressively, but strategically, between Sarah and the Black Hand enforcers. There was no exchange of words, no overt challenge, just a silent, undeniable assertion of territory. The enforcer with the scarred eyebrow paused, his reaching hand retracting slightly. His eyes, though still cold, flickered toward Xander at the top of the stairs, then to his own boss Gregory, who had shrunk into himself. A silent, tense standoff. Then Xander finally spoke, his voice carrying effortlessly across the suddenly hushed gallery. "Mr. Vance," he addressed Gregory, his tone cool, unhurried, yet laced with a steel edge that made Alaric flinch. "I believe your associates have misunderstood. Miss Vance is currently under my employ. Any outstanding debts or claims regarding her person will now, by extension, be routed through me." The last word was a silk-clad threat, a declaration of ownership that left no room for debate. The scarred enforcer exchanged a swift, meaningful glance with his counterpart. They understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a decree. Xander Thorne was not someone to be trifled with. With a barely perceptible nod, they nudged Gregory towards the exit, their threats now muted, their menace redirected. Gregory cast a pathetic, pleading look at Sarah, but she saw only the self-preservation in his eyes, the man who would always sacrifice her for his own skin. He was gone, swallowed by the revolving doors, and with him, the immediate physical threat from the Black Hand. Alaric, however, was emboldened. Employ? Xander, what nonsense is this? She is fired. She damaged a priceless work. She is a liability, and furthermore, she is indebted to— I'm well aware of Miss Vance's circumstances, Alaric. Xander cut him off, his voice colder than ice, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. And I assure you, her liability will be absorbed by me. He descended the stairs, each step deliberate, resonating with power. He stopped directly in front of Sarah, turning his back on a suddenly mute Alaric. The faint scent of his cologne, that dangerous blend of old leather and raw power, enveloped her, a strange, intoxicating comfort amidst the chaos. His gaze, when it met hers, was piercing, scrutinizing, yet there was a flicker of something else now, a predatory glint of possession. My collection requires a conservator of exceptional talent, Miss Vance, and discretion. You possess both. He gestured vaguely towards the damaged triptych. That was a test. A regrettable one, but a test nonetheless. You passed. Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. Test? He orchestrated this? The thought was both terrifying and infuriating. Yet, underneath the anger, a chilling relief began to spread, thawing the knot of fear in her stomach. He had saved her. From Alaric. From Gregory. From the Black Hand. But at what cost? I don't understand, she whispered, her voice still hoarse. It is quite simple, Xander replied, his voice a low, intimate murmur, meant only for her. You work for me. Exclusively. Your debts are settled. Your stepfather will no longer bother you. Alaric Thorne will no longer threaten you. In return, your skills are mine. Your time is mine. Your loyalty, Miss Vance, his gaze intensified, burning into hers, is unequivocally mine. He held out a hand, gloved and immaculate, an offer and a demand. His fingers were long, elegant, capable of both precision and destruction. It wasn't a choice. It was a forced surrender, a devil's bargain offered by a man who had just saved her, but who clearly intended to claim her as his own. She was trading one cage for another, albeit a much more gilded and terrifying one. Sarah looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his unreadable eyes. She saw the crushing weight of her debts, the venomous spite of Alaric, the looming shadow of the Black Hand. She saw the absolute, terrifying lack of any other option. Her helplessness was profound, a yawning chasm at her feet. But then she also saw the promise of safety, the undeniable power emanating from him, a shield against a world determined to break her. This was not freedom, not truly. But it was survival. And survival for now was all she could hope for. With a profound internal sigh that stole the last vestiges of her strength, Sarah reached out, her trembling fingers brushing against the cool, soft leather of his glove. The contact was electric, a jolt of surrender, and a terrifying, dangerous spark of curiosity. She had stepped out of the frying pan and willingly, irrevocably, into the fire. Deal, she whispered, the single word a testament to her desperation, her fear, and the chilling, undeniable truth. She had just stepped into Xander Thorne's world, and there was no turning back. His fingers closed around hers, a possessive grip that felt both binding and strangely, terrifyingly secure. The transition from her cramped, beleaguered apartment to Xander Thorne's world was jarring, a dizzying ascent into a realm of polished marble and hushed opulence. The SUV, dark and silent, had whisked her away from the obsidian gallery, leaving behind the wreckage of her old life. She hadn't even been allowed to gather her meager belongings. They will be procured, Xander had stated, his voice devoid of inflection, and delivered. You will need nothing. It was both a promise and a command, stripping her of the last vestiges of independence. Now she stood in the grand foyer of what Xander simply referred to as the residence, though it felt more like a fortress disguised as a palace. Soaring ceilings, frescoed with scenes of classical mythology, stretched above. Sunlight, filtered through enormous arched windows, cast shimmering patterns on intricately inlaid floors. Works of art, not just paintings but ancient sculptures, delicate tapestries, and rare antiquities, adorned every conceivable surface. This wasn't merely a house. It was a curated universe, each piece chosen with an eye for both beauty and untold value. The air smelled of beeswax, old paper, and something subtly masculine, Xander's scent, a constant, pervasive presence that had already begun to define her new surroundings. A stern-faced woman in a crisp uniform, Mrs. Eldridge, the housekeeper, had greeted her with a polite but distant efficiency. Mr. Thorne expects you to be comfortable, Miss Vance. Your quarters are prepared. Sarah was led through a labyrinth of silent corridors, past rooms filled with furniture that looked like museum pieces, to a suite that dwarfed her entire former apartment. A king-size bed with silk sheets, a private sitting area with a gas fireplace, and a bathroom larger than her old kitchen, complete with a freestanding clawfoot tub. Her meager suitcase, magically procured, sat neatly by the closet. It felt like a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating. Her studio within the residence was equally extravagant. A vast, airy space with enormous north-facing windows, custom-built easels, a comprehensive array of the finest conservation tools, and a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere that promised creative freedom. Here, amidst the scent of freshly cut wood and high-quality solvents, she found a strange, cautious comfort. Xander himself was a spectral presence in these initial days. He moved through the residence with a quiet authority, a shadow of impeccable tailoring. Their interactions were strictly professional, revolving around the art. He would appear in her studio, unannounced, his presence suddenly filling the room. He spoke with a quiet intensity, his knowledge of art history staggering, his observations about technique and provenance unnervingly astute. He would point to a faint hairline crack in a porcelain vase or a subtle discoloration in a Baroque portrait, detailing its history, its vulnerabilities, and his expectations for its restoration. Sarah, despite her initial trepidation, found herself drawn into these discussions, her own passion for art reignited by his profound understanding. One morning, while Sarah was meticulously cleaning a delicate medieval manuscript, Xander appeared. He watched her work for a long moment, his dark eyes intense, before speaking. You did not eat breakfast, Miss Vance. Sarah flinched, startled. She hadn't even realized he was there. I wasn't hungry. Your focus is commendable, he conceded, his voice low, but ineffective on an empty stomach. Mrs. Eldridge will bring you something. You will consume it. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, delivered with an unwavering calm that left no room for defiance. Moments later, a tray appeared, laden with fresh fruit, artisan bread, and steaming coffee. Sarah ate, feeling the subtle burn of his gaze from across the room, feeling both infantilized and, strangely, cared for. This became a recurring theme. He never intruded on her personal space, never pressed for details of her past, yet he was always aware of her needs. A new, more ergonomic chair would appear in her studio after she mentioned a stiff back. Books she'd merely expressed interest in were discreetly placed on her reading table. When a rare evening thunderstorm made her jumpy, she found a cup of calming herbal tea waiting outside her door. Each act was small, almost imperceptible, yet they accumulated, chipping away at her defenses, eroding the initial hostility she felt towards her captor. She was trapped, yes, but in this gilded cage, she was also undeniably protected, seen, and in a strange, silent way cherished. The awareness of his constant, watchful presence was unsettling at first. She would catch glimpses of him in the long corridors, or feel his gaze from across a vast hall, always observing, always assessing. It made her acutely aware of her every movement, her every expression. But slowly, imperceptibly, the fear began to morph into something else. A flicker of cautious comfort. A growing curiosity. She began to study him, too. The way his hand would clench imperceptibly when discussing a piece of art that had been damaged by neglect. The subtle tension in his jaw when he spoke to his staff, revealing a man burdened by immense responsibilities. Their shared passion for art became a fragile bridge between them. One afternoon, while working on a heavily oxidized portrait, Sarah found herself explaining the intricate chemical processes involved, her voice animated, her hands gesturing. Xander listened, his head tilted, his eyes fixed on her, not the painting. When she finished, he merely nodded. Fascinating. The resurrection of beauty. Powerful act. His words, for the first time, felt less like a critique and more like an acknowledgement, a connection. A subtle attraction, dangerous and forbidden, began to bloom in the quiet spaces between them. It wasn't a fiery passion, but a slow burn, fueled by his enigmatic presence, his unexpected kindnesses, and the sheer power he wielded. She would find herself wondering about his world outside these walls, the dealings that required his men to move with such quiet efficiency, the silent authority that rippled around him. He was a mystery, a dangerous enigma, and she, the unwitting recipient of his possessive protection, found herself wanting to unravel him. One evening, as twilight bled through the studio windows, casting long dramatic shadows across the canvases, Xander stood by the fireplace, nursing a glass of amber liquid. The silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged. "You are settled, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "Thank you." He turned, his dark eyes meeting hers across the vast room. A flicker of something unreadable passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken terms of their arrangement. She was an object of his collection, precious and fiercely guarded. But in his gaze, she saw not just ownership, but a dawning sense of something akin to admiration, even reverence. And for Sarah, the woman who had always been overlooked, exploited, and discarded, that, more than anything, was a potent, dangerous allure. She was trapped, yes, but she was no longer fading. Under his intense gaze, she felt, for the first time in years, truly seen. The silence deepened, filled with the unspoken promise of a future she couldn't yet comprehend, a future inexorably bound to his. The gilded cage, as Sarah had come to think of Xander's estate, offered a peculiar blend of serenity and underlying tension. While the days flowed into a rhythmic pattern of art and quietude, the outside world, like a persistent serpent, occasionally tried to coil its way in. Sarah felt a cautious sense of ease she hadn't known in years. Yet every unexpected email or unfamiliar name on Xander's call log sent a faint ripple of unease through her. She was protected, yes, but from whom, and to what extent, she was still learning. The first hiss came in the form of an article in a minor art blog. Sarah stumbled upon it purely by accident, while researching a particular pigment for a challenging restoration. The headline screamed, "Obsidian Gallery Scandal, Promising Conservator Fired for Gross Negligence on Priceless Triptych." The article, clearly fed by Alaric Thorne, painted Sarah as incompetent, irresponsible, and a danger to the very art she claimed to protect. It was a thinly veiled attempt to blackball her from the industry, a final spiteful act from her former boss. A wave of furious indignation washed over Sarah. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from raw anger. After all her hard work, all her sacrifices, Alaric was still trying to destroy her. She felt the familiar sting of injustice, the suffocating rage that had so often been her silent companion. It was annoying, yes, but beneath that, a fleeting fear tightened her chest. Could Alaric's smear campaign somehow reach Xander, perhaps erode his trust in her? Would she lose this fragile, dangerous sanctuary she had found? She found Xander in his private study, a room lined with leather-bound books and rare maps, the scent of old paper and cedar filling the air. He sat at a massive mahogany desk, his posture impeccable, staring at a monitor filled with a cascade of complex data. She hesitated at the threshold, the crumpled printout of the article in her hand feeling impossibly heavy. "Mr. Thorne." Her voice was thin, reedy. He looked up, his dark eyes instantly assessing the tremor in her voice, the tautness in her shoulders. His gaze flicked to the paper in her hand. "Oh." Alaric's latest endeavor. His tone was devoid of surprise, merely a calm acknowledgement. Sarah pushed the article across the desk. He's trying to ruin me, to make sure I can never work again. Her anger flared, hot and desperate. It's a lie. I didn't touch that triptych. Xander picked up the paper, his elegant fingers barely grazing the cheap newsprint. He read it, his expression unchanging, a mask of controlled indifference. Predictable. Alaric is a creature of habit and fear. He set the article down, then, with a deliberate motion, dragged his finger across the screen of his large desktop monitor, revealing a new page. It was a comprehensive list of upcoming art exhibitions, auction houses, and prestigious galleries. Beside each entry in bold red letters was a stark message: Alaric Thorne, persona non grata. All business relations suspended due to egregious professional misconduct and unethical practices. Sarah stared, her mouth slightly agape. What is this? Xander leaned back in his chair, a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. A preemptive measure. Alaric's unfortunate negligence has been brought to the attention of the wider art world. His reputation, it appears, is now entirely beyond repair. A cautionary tale, perhaps. He met her stunned gaze, his eyes burning with an unsettling satisfaction. No one threatens what is mine, Miss Vance. Not without consequence. A profound relief washed over Sarah, a dizzying wave that almost buckled her knees. The suffocating fear, the righteous anger, they dissolved, leaving behind a profound sense of... Xander hadn't just countered Alaric's attack. He had obliterated Alaric's entire career. It was a chilling demonstration of his ruthless efficiency, a quiet but absolute display of power. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a public scene, but the effect was far more devastating. This man truly was dangerous, in a way she was only just beginning to comprehend. And he had done it all for her. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a strange mixture of fear and a dangerous thrill. The serpent hissed again a few days later, this time a more personal, insidious attack. Sarah received a burner phone from one of Xander's men, a device she was now required to carry for security. On it, a series of desperate, pleading texts from Gregory Vance. Sarah, please. They're going to kill me. You're with Xander Thorne now, right? He's rich. He can help. Just one more payment, sweetheart, please. Tell him I need him to settle my debt. He owes you, doesn't he? Her stomach clenched. Gregory. Always Gregory. His relentless self-pity, his bottomless capacity for self-destruction. The texts were followed by frantic calls, ignored by Sarah, then increasingly threatening messages from the Black Hand enforcers, hinting that if Xander wouldn't settle Gregory's debt, they might just come for Sarah again. The fleeting fear returned, sharper this time. She was no longer just protecting herself. She was a potential vulnerability for Xander, a loose thread in his carefully woven world. Xander found her in the studio, staring blankly at the messages on the burner phone. He took the phone from her hand, his fingers brushing hers, a spark of unwelcome intimacy. He read the texts, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Gregory Vance is a persistent, pathetic parasite, Xander stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. And the Black Hand are foolish if they believe their claims extend to what I possess. He made a single call, his voice low and guttural, speaking in a language Sarah didn't understand, filled with sharp, clipped consonants and dark vowels. The conversation was brief, brutal. When he hung up, he looked at Sarah, his eyes cold and unwavering. Gregory Vance has been relocated to a remote, inhospitable region where his gambling addiction will find no outlet, and his capacity for causing trouble will be severely curtailed. He will not trouble you again. As for the Black Hand, a chilling smile, devoid of warmth, touched his lips. They have been reminded of the delicate balance of power in this city. They will now understand that you are under my protection. An absolute, inviolable protection. Their business with you, and with anyone connected to you, is concluded. Permanently. The finality in his voice, the casual ruthlessness with which he had extinguished both Alaric's career and Gregory's presence, sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. It was terrifying, yet undeniably effective. She felt a profound, almost dizzying relief. The burdens that had crushed her for so long were simply gone, swept away by Xander Thorne's silent, formidable power. He had not just protected her, he had claimed her in a way that left no room for doubt or escape. The serpent had hissed, and Xander had, with chilling precision, crushed its head. The sense of his dangerous capabilities, his escalating possessiveness, was palpable, a dark, Alluring force, she was now irrevocably bound to the meticulously curated silence of Xander's private gallery had, over the weeks, become a strange kind of comfort for Sarah. She moved among priceless artifacts and canvases, her gloved hands delicately coaxing beauty back to life, her mind slowly unclenching from the vice of constant fear. Yet, beneath the serene surface, a restless curiosity about Xander himself simmered. He was a man of impeccable taste and terrifying control, a formidable protector who had, with chilling ease, swept away her tormentors. But the sheer perfection of his world, the lack of any visible flaw, hinted at carefully constructed walls. She was working in a seldom-used wing, a smaller, more intimate gallery reserved for less monumental pieces. The room, bathed in the soft, diffused light of late afternoon, smelled faintly of old parchment and the subtle, lingering trace of Xander's presence. Her current project was a series of exquisitely detailed miniature portraits, requiring painstaking precision. But her attention kept drifting. Her gaze snagged on a small, unassuming easel tucked away in a shadowed corner, almost hidden behind a colossal Roman bust. Unlike the polished grandeur surrounding it, this easel held a canvas covered with a simple, undyed linen cloth. An anomaly. A prickle of intrigue, sharp and insistent, urged her forward. Gently, carefully, Sarah approached the easel. The linen felt coarse under her fingertips, a stark contrast to the silks and velvets that typically draped Xander's treasures. Her heart gave an unbidden flutter, a nervous excitement blossoming in her chest. She knew she shouldn't. This was an invasion, a trespass into a space Xander had clearly meant to keep private. But the mystery, the sheer incongruity of it, was too compelling. With a soft intake of breath, she lifted the cloth. Beneath it lay not a masterpiece, nor even a work of technical brilliance, but something raw, visceral, and profoundly unfinished. It was a painting, clearly done in oils, but with a furious, almost violent energy. The colors were dark, brooding, storm gray, bruised purple, a vivid, almost painful splash of crimson that seemed to pulse from the canvas. The subject was abstract, yet disturbingly recognizable, a storm-tossed sea under an enraged sky, but within the tumultuous waves, Sarah could discern faint, fragmented forms. Not ships, but faces. Faces twisted in agony, in despair, in a silent scream. And in the very center, barely discernible, a small, dark shape, half submerged, half consumed by the maelstrom. Broken crown. It was crude, unrefined, completely lacking the meticulous precision Xander applied to every aspect of his life. The brushstrokes were thick, aggressive, betraying a tormented hand, a soul in anguish. It was the antithesis of everything she knew about Xander Thorne. This wasn't the work of a seasoned artist. It was the outpouring of a damaged spirit. Sarah felt a pang, a sharp ache of empathy that surprised her. This painting wasn't meant for display. It was a wound laid bare. She traced the angry crimson with her gaze, deep understanding blooming within her. This wasn't a flawed piece of art. It was a crack in Xander's formidable armor. A curious find, wouldn't you agree, Miss Vance? The low, resonant voice, cold and sharp as splintered ice, shattered the quiet introspection. Sarah whirled, her heart leaping into her throat, the linen cloth slipping from her nerveless fingers. Xander stood in the arched doorway, a silent, imposing figure, his dark eyes fixed on the painting, then on her, an unreadable intensity in their depths. There was no anger in his voice, but a tautness in his jaw, a stillness that was more menacing than any outburst. He looked exposed, though his expression remained a carefully constructed mask. Mr. Thorne, I apologize. I shouldn't have touched it. Sarah stammered, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, suffocating, charged with unspoken emotions. He didn't acknowledge her apology. Instead, he walked slowly into the room, his gaze unwavering from the turbulent canvas. The faint scent of his cologne seemed to sharpen, tinged with something metallic, like the edge of a memory. He stopped beside her, his proximity overwhelming, yet she found herself unable to move. It is unlike anything else in your collection, Sarah ventured, her voice barely a whisper, compelled by an urge she couldn't suppress. So much pain. His gaze flickered to her, a brief, piercing glance that held a raw, unsettling vulnerability she'd never seen before. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the familiar obsidian mask. It is a reminder, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. Of what? She dared to ask, her own heart pounding a desperate rhythm against her ribs. She braced herself for a sharp retort, a reprimand for her intrusion. Instead, he took a breath, a slow, deliberate intake that expanded his broad chest, before exhaling slowly. "Of what happens when ambition devours all else," he finally said, his gaze returning to the painting, his voice dropping almost to himself. "Of promises broken, of betrayal suffered, of the cost of a crown forged in blood." Sarah watched him, truly seeing him for the first time. The billionaire boss, the ruthless protector, the man who moved through shadows with effortless authority, he was all of those things. But here, in the dim light of this forgotten gallery, staring at this furious painting, he was also something else, a man haunted by ghosts. "The broken crown," she murmured, her voice soft with dawning understanding. "Is that your family's legacy?" He gave a short, humorless laugh, harsh, guttural sound that grated on the hushed silence. "My family's curse. My father, Giovanni, built an empire." Sarah felt a profound empathy bloom within her, softening the edges of her own anxieties. She understood the weight of a twisted family, the suffocating grip of inherited burdens. Her own experience with Gregory with a black hand had been a grotesque parody of Xander's grander, more lethal struggles. She reached out, a hesitant, almost involuntary gesture, her fingers hovering near his arm. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, as if surprised by the unexpected proximity, then slowly turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. In that shared gaze, a fragile, unspoken bridge formed between them. It wasn't pity she offered, but a recognition of his pain, a silent testament to a shared understanding of broken worlds. The air crackled with a potent, undeniable tension, not of fear, but of an intimacy far deeper than any physical touch. "You're trying to fix it, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The empire? The curse?" He stared at her, his expression a complex tapestry of surprise, introspection, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. A muscle in his jaw flexed. Perhaps, he admitted, the single word a rare, profound concession. His gaze dropped to her hand, still hovering near his arm, then slowly, deliberately, his own gloved hand reached out. Not to touch her, but to gently, carefully, cover the painting with a linen cloth once more. It was a gesture of profound vulnerability, trusting her with his secret, then shielding it from the harsh light of judgment. "Some things," he said, his voice now almost impossibly low, "cannot be fixed. Only are contained." His eyes, dark as obsidian, fixed on hers, holding a silent question, an unspoken invitation. Sarah felt a tremor run through her, a rush of blood to her cheeks. She was no longer just his employee, his protected asset. She was a confidant, a witness to the cracks in his armor. And in his gaze, in the deepening silence that enveloped them, she sensed the undeniable, dangerous pull of a bond that was rapidly intensifying, drawing them both into a future neither of them had anticipated. She wondered, with a shiver, if she was becoming not just contained, but utterly, irrevocably claimed. The fragile piece Sarah had found within Xander's opulent estate felt, for a fleeting moment, almost real. He had, with his silent, formidable power, swept away the direct threats, leaving her in a bubble of gilded security. A new sense of self, a quiet strength, had begun to blossom in the fertile ground of her newfound safety. Xander, ever meticulous, had insisted she experience a semblance of normalcy. This meant a carefully orchestrated, infrequent trip to a specialized art supply store in a discreet part of the city, accompanied by his unobtrusive men. Today was one such day. The crisp autumn air, invigorated by a recent rain, smelled of wet pavement and distant wood smoke. Sarah walked with a lightness she hadn't realized she'd lost. The hum of the city a vibrant backdrop instead of a menacing roar. Xander's men, too silent, imposing figures in dark suits, maintained a respectful distance, blending seamlessly into the urban tapestry. It was the closest she'd felt to freedom since entering Xander's world. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile as she admired a vibrant display of oil pastels in a shop window, a momentary lapse in her usual hypervigilance. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from a darkened alleyway, too swift, too deliberate to be casual. Then another. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced her fragile sense of security. Her heart, which had been beating with a gentle rhythm of peace, now hammered against her ribs, a frantic warning drum. She turned, searching for Xander's men, but they were no longer in her immediate line of sight, momentarily obscured by a delivery truck. Panic. It seized her, stark and terrifying, a primal scream trapped in her throat. Before she could even call out, a hand clamped brutally over her mouth, muffling her gasp. A heavy arm snaked around her waist, yanking her backward with a sickening force. The scent of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne filled her nostrils, acrid and suffocating. Her feet left the ground, a dizzying sensation of being lifted, dragged, swallowed. She struggled, kicking and twisting, her small strength a futile flailing against the iron grip of her unseen assailant. A dull pain bloomed on her temple as her head hit something hard. Disorientation blurred her vision, the vibrant cityscape spinning into a dizzying vortex of color and light. She was shoved roughly into the back of a dark van, the interior smelling of industrial cleaner and stale fear. The heavy thud of the doors slamming shut echoed like a death knell. Darkness enveloped her, absolute and suffocating, punctuated only by the faint throb behind her eyes and the frantic beat of her own heart. Two figures, indistinct in the gloom, loomed over her. One of them, a gruff, rasping voice muttered, "Got her." Clean as a whistle. The van lurched forward, accelerating rapidly, throwing Sarah against the cold, metal wall. Tears of terror pricked her eyes, but she bit them back, refusing to give her captors the satisfaction. Xander. He'll know. He'll find me. The thought was a desperate plea, a lifeline she clung to in the overwhelming darkness. But insidious doubt, cold and creeping, began to seep in. Why had his men been so far? Why had she been left so vulnerable? The ride was long, disorienting. Every turn, every bump, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. Finally, the van screeched to a halt. The door was ripped open, blinding light momentarily searing her eyes. She was hauled out, her legs unsteady, onto rough concrete. The air was damp heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. They were in a cavernous, derelict warehouse, its vastness swallowed by shadows, illuminated by a single bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. And there, standing in the harsh, unflattering light, was Alaric Thorne. His face was a mask of furious triumph, his usual impeccable facade cracked by a raw, vengeful glee. Beside him, a beefy man with a slicked-back ponytail and a cruel glint in his eyes, the capo from the Black Hand Syndicate, the very man Xander had supposedly dealt with. "Look what the cat dragged in," Alaric sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Our little conservator. So much for Mr. Thorne's inviolable protection, wouldn't you say?" Sarah's stomach twisted. Alaric. And the Black Hand. This wasn't a random attack. It was orchestrated. A cold, heavy stone settled in her chest. Gregory. He must have done this. He must have sold her out again. The thought was a bitter, sickening betrayal. The capo stepped forward, his eyes raking over Sarah's trembling form with an unsettling appraisal. "The boss wasn't pleased, little bird. Mr. Thorne thinks he can just wave his money around and make problems disappear. But some debts are paid in blood, and some information is more valuable than any art collection." He grabbed her chin, his fingers digging into her skin, forcing her to look at him. "Your stepfather proved that, didn't he? Told us where to find you. Told us how to get under Xander Thorne's skin." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Gregory. He betrayed me. Again. The initial surge of hope, the desperate reliance on Xander, began to crumble, replaced by a profound, agonizing sense of abandonment. Xander had promised protection. He had promised to make Gregory disappear. And yet, here she was, in the clutches of the very people he swore to protect her from. Alaric, sensing her despair, stepped closer, his voice a malicious whisper. "You see, Seraphina? Your great protector isn't so great after all. Or perhaps," he smiled, a truly evil curve of his lips, "he simply doesn't care enough to stop them. He must have you." A message to his rivals. A disposable pawn. The accusation, delivered with such venomous certainty, pierced through her last defenses. Disposable pawn. The words echoed in her mind, colder than the concrete beneath her feet. Was this it? Was this Xander's dark side, the hidden cost of his protection? Had he used her to flush out his enemies, sacrificing her for his own machinations? The thought was a torment, a betrayal far deeper than Gregory's or Alaric's. It was a betrayal of the nascent trust, the fragile connection she had foolishly allowed to form between them. The capo roughly spun her around, pushing her towards a grimy, rusted metal cage in the corner of the warehouse. Xander Thorne thinks he can control everything. Let's see how well he controls his temper when he sees what happens to his newest acquisition. He paused, a cruel glint in his eye. We'll send him a little souvenir. A piece of his precious collection, broken beyond repair. Sarah stumbled, her knees threatening to give out. The cold, hard bars of the cage felt like the ultimate symbol of her hopelessness. She was trapped, completely at their mercy, and the man she had begun to trust, the man who had promised to protect her, felt miles away, unreachable, a phantom of a false promise. She was just another piece of art to him, a possession to be claimed, and now a pawn to be sacrificed. The betrayal was a bitter taste in her mouth, a burning wound in her soul. As the heavy metal gate clanged shut, echoing ominously in the vast empty space, Sarah sank to the floor, her body racked with tremors. The cold, unforgiving despair settled over her, a blanket of absolute hopelessness. She closed her eyes, wishing for oblivion, believing, with every fiber of her being, that Xander Thorne had abandoned her to the darkest hour, to a fate worse than anything Alaric or Gregory could have ever inflicted. The emotional distance between them, born of this profound misunderstanding and agonizing perceived betrayal, felt insurmountable, a chasm she could never bridge. Her world had not just crumbled, it had utterly, irrevocably shattered. The first warning was a single silent alert from Xander's encrypted comms, the geofencing breach around Sarah's known location, swiftly followed by a frantic, coded ping from his lead security detail. The world, which moments before had been a meticulously ordered tapestry of numbers and art valuations in Xander's study, shattered into jagged fragments. A cold, hard knot of dread seized his gut, twisting violently. Sarah? His breath caught, sharp and painful. He had promised her protection. Absolute. Inviolable. And now that promise felt like ash on his tongue. Rage, pure and undiluted, surged through him, a terrifying force that buckled the very air around him. It wasn't just anger. It was a primal, territorial fury, igniting a dangerous fire in his obsidian eyes. He gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, the polished wood groaning under the force. They touched what is mine. The thought was a red haze behind his vision. His men, usually calm and collected, reported the vanishing act, their voices tight with barely concealed panic. Sarah gone. Vanished in broad daylight. Find her, Xander snarled into his comms, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent shivers down the spines of hardened men across the city. Every resource, every contact. Tear this city apart if you have to. I want eyes on her, and I want the heads of those who took her. Now, his study, usually a sanctuary, became a command center bristling with frantic energy. Screens flared to life, displaying traffic camera feeds, satellite imagery, and a dizzying array of data streams. His network, built over years of quiet, ruthless expansion, hummed into terrifying action. Every shadow, every whisper in the city's underworld, was now working for him. Vehicle identified Mr. Thorne. His head of security, a man named Cashin, reported, his voice tight. Black panel van, unregistered plates, heading east, Pier District. Xander didn't wait. He moved, a blur of controlled power, his expensive suit no impediment to his raw, predatory speed. His personal armored vehicle, a sleek black beast, was already waiting at the curb, engine purring like a hungry predator. Cashin slid into the passenger seat, a suppressed firearm appearing in his hand as if by magic. Pier District, Xander repeated, his hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. The city outside dissolved into a kaleidoscope of speed and urgent purpose. His mind raced, calculating, strategizing, fueled by a desperate resolve that bordered on madness. If they harm her. The unspoken threat hung heavy, a promise of unspeakable retribution. Fear for Sarah, raw and corrosive, was a burning acid in his chest. He saw her face, pale and fragile, eyes wide with terror, and the fury roared anew. The chase was a high-octane ballet of controlled chaos. Xander drove with a reckless precision, weaving through Manhattan traffic like a phantom, the roaring engine a furious extension of his own rage. Police sirens, distant at first, grew closer, then faded as his customized vehicle effortlessly bypassed checkpoints and outmaneuvered patrols, its advanced systems a silent defiance of the city's authority. He didn't care about the collateral damage to his public image. He cared only about getting Sarah back. They burst into the grimy, desolate landscape of the Pier District, the air thick with the smell of brine, rust, and desperation. The black van was visible, just ahead, turning into a sprawling, dilapidated warehouse. The building loomed, a skeletal ruin against a bruised twilight sky. Its shadowed, promising, unspeakable horrors. Cash and secure the perimeter, Xander ordered, his voice flat, dangerously calm. No one in. No one out. And I want the capo alive. For now. He exited the vehicle, moving with a silent, deadly grace that spoke of years of training, of battles fought in shadows. He bypassed the main entrance, instead scaling a rusted fire escape with impossible agility, his expensive leather shoes finding purchase on the slick, decaying metal. The metal groaned, but he ignored it, his focus absolute. He dropped lightly onto a catwalk high above the warehouse floor, the vast space stretching out below him, a tableau of Sarah's impending nightmare. The scene confirmed his darkest fears. Sarah, pale and trembling, was confined within a rusted metal cage, her eyes wide with terror. Alaric Thorne, a smug, triumphant sneer marring his face, stood beside the capo from the Black Hand, a burly brute whose cruel smile confirmed his identity. Gregory Vance, her pathetic stepfather, cowered in a corner, already a broken man. Xander's rage reached a boiling point, pure, incandescent fury. He was no longer the meticulous collector, the suave billionaire. He was a force of nature, a predator unleashed. With a guttural roar that echoed through the vast space, shattering the silence, he launched himself from the catwalk. He landed with a bone-jarring impact directly behind the capo, the sound like a thunderclap. The capo whirled, startled, his eyes widening in disbelief. Before he could react, Xander's fist connected with his jaw, a brutal, concussive blow that snapped the man's head back with sickening force. The capo staggered, spitting blood, his eyes dazed. Xander didn't wait. He moved like a dark whirlwind, a blur of trained violence. He disarmed the capo with a swift, brutal twist, the gun clattering uselessly to the concrete. Another blow, a knee to the gut, sent the brute crashing to the floor, gasping for air. Alaric Thorne, his face draining of color, stammered, "Xander, what is the meaning of this? This is police business. These men are—" Xander didn't even look at him. He stalked towards Alaric, his eyes burning with an infernal light. He grabbed Alaric by the throat, his fingers like iron bands, lifting the man effortlessly off his feet. Alaric clawed at Xander's hand, his eyes bulging, choking for air. "You touched her," Xander rasped, his voice a low, terrifying growl that resonated with the raw power of a primal beast. "You laid a hand on what is mine." He slammed Alaric against a metal support beam, the clang echoing like a death knell. "You will regret this," he hissed, his face inches from Alaric's contorted features, every single agonizing second of it. He dropped Alaric, who crumpled to the floor, gasping and whimpering like a beaten dog. His gaze swept to the cage. Sarah? She was staring at him, her eyes wide with shock, fear, and a dawning fragile hope. Her small, vulnerable figure in that cruel cage ignited a fresh wave of protective fury in him. He moved to the cage, tearing at the rusted latch with a strength that defied human limits, the metal groaning, bending, and finally snapping under his relentless assault. He pulled Sarah into his arms, crushing her against his chest. Her trembling body felt impossibly fragile against his own. The rage, which had been a consuming fire, now softened into a desperate, overwhelming relief. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent, a desperate affirmation that she was real, she was safe, she was here. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion, his possessiveness absolute, etched in every syllable. "My Sarah?" He held her tightly, as if he could absorb her fear, meld her into his very being. The warehouse fell silent, broken only by Alaric's whimpers and Sarah's ragged breathing. Xander looked up, his gaze sweeping over the cowering remnants of the Black Hand Syndicate, then to Gregory Vance, who had wet himself in terror. His fury, though momentarily muted by Sarah's presence, was far from extinguished. In fact, it had merely deepened, sharpened. He had rescued his most precious possession. Now the real hunt, the true reckoning, would begin. And the consequences for those who dared to defy him would be devastating. The aftermath of Sarah's abduction was a blur of controlled chaos and swift, decisive action. Xander's men, moving with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, swarmed the warehouse. Alaric Thorne, still whimpering on the floor, was roughly hauled away, his protest silenced with practiced ease. Gregory Vance, a pathetic, sobbing mess, was collected, his fate an unspoken, chilling promise. The surviving Black Hand enforcers were disarmed, subdued, their defiance crumbling under the sheer, unyielding force of Xander's retribution. Xander, however, remained rooted to the spot, holding Sarah. He didn't speak, But his embrace was fierce, almost crushing, as if he could physically shield her from the horrors she had endured. Sarah, trembling violently, buried her face in his chest, inhaling the clean, expensive scent of him, clinging to the solid strength of his body. The raw terror of the past hours began to recede, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying sense of safety. She was safe. He had come for her. The thought was a powerful balm to her shattered nerves. Back at the residence, the opulence felt less like a cage and more like a sanctuary. Sarah was whisked away by Mrs. Eldridge, who for the first time showed a flicker of genuine concern in her stern eyes. A warm bath, infused with soothing lavender, eased the physical aches, washing away the grime and the lingering stench of fear. Clean clothes, soft and comforting, replaced her torn and stained attire. But the emotional scars ran deeper, etching themselves onto her soul. Xander found her later in her suite, sitting curled on the vast silk-covered bed, a cup of untouched herbal tea growing cold beside her. He stood framed in the doorway, a formidable shadow, his face devoid of the raw fury she had witnessed at the warehouse, now replaced by a chilling calm. He was still in his ruined suit, a dark stain of grime marring his pristine jacket. He looked like a god of vengeance, both terrifying and undeniably compelling. Sarah. His voice was low, soft, yet it resonated with an unwavering command. He approached slowly, sitting on the edge of the bed, not touching her, but his mere presence was a powerful anchor. "Are you harmed?" Sarah shook her head, her voice a fragile whisper. "No, just shaken." Her eyes, still wide and haunted, met his. I thought you'd abandon me." The accusation hung in the air, a raw, vulnerable admission. A flicker of intense pain crossed Xander's face, quick as a shadow, before his mask of control settled back into place. "Never," he stated, his voice a low, fierce vow. "Never, Sarah. You are mine." They learned that lesson tonight. Brutal one. He paused, his gaze fixed on hers, unwavering. "Gregory sold you to them. Alaric orchestrated the ambush, believing I would abandon you." Sarah's breath hitched. The confirmation of Gregory's betrayal, though expected, still stung. What will happen to them? The question was laced with fear, but also a strange, burgeoning curiosity. She had witnessed Xander's wrath. She knew it would be merciless. Xander's eyes, dark as obsidian, hardened. "Alaric Thorne," he began, his voice devoid of pity, each word a hammer blow, "will find himself disbarred, destitute, and completely discredited. His name will be synonymous with fraud and depravity. His gallery, his entire legacy, will be systematically dismantled and turned into a public art school for underprivileged children, a perpetual reminder of his downfall. He will spend his remaining years in a cell, reviled and utterly broken. Perhaps worse." The unspoken implications were chilling, a chilling testament to Xander's power. "Gregory Vance," Xander continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "has already been neutralized. He will spend the rest of his miserable life in a place where gambling is impossible and human interaction is minimal. He will regret the day he ever learned your name. He will never, ever pose a threat to you again. He is effectively, permanently, exiled from existence as he knows it." A cold satisfaction, dark and potent, unfurled in Sarah's chest. It was a terrifying emotion, yet undeniably gratifying. Vengeful satisfaction. These men had broken her, exploited her, and Xander, her formidable protector, was delivering a reckoning. As for the Black Hand Syndicate, Xander concluded, a predatory gleam in his eyes, their operations in this city have been utterly shattered. Their capo is no longer a concern. Their leaders will find their assets frozen, their networks exposed, their power base obliterated. Tonight marks the beginning of their end. They dared to touch what is mine, Sarah. They will pay for that transgression 1,000-fold. He reached out, his hand slowly, gently, cupping her cheek. His touch was warm, possessive, a stark contrast to the ruthless words he had just spoken. Sarah flinched at the intensity of his gaze, but didn't pull away. She saw the unwavering commitment in his eyes, the absolute, undeniable control he exerted over his world, and now over hers. "No one," Xander said, his voice a low, raw vow, his thumb stroking her skin with a tender possessiveness that sent shivers through her, "will ever lay a hand on you again, Sarah. No one will ever threaten you, exploit you, or cause you a moment of fear. You are under my absolute protection. My claim. You are mine." The words were a declaration, an unshakable promise. They resonated deep within her, shaking loose the last vestiges of her terror, replacing them with a potent, terrifying sense of security. She looked into his dark, fathomless eyes, seeing not just the ruthless billionaire, but the man who had, with terrifying efficiency, raised a world to save her. She was healing, yes, but her gratitude was profound, tinged with a healthy fear of the dark capabilities he possessed. He was her protector, her captor, and her salvation. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she was irrevocably, absolutely his. The reclamation was complete. The city, once a battleground of shadows and deceit, began to hum with a different kind of energy. The remnants of Alaric Thorne's disgraced empire were indeed systematically dismantled, his name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones across the art world. The Black Hand, crippled by Xander's relentless assault, retreated back into the deeper, darker recesses of the underworld, their power severely curtailed. Gregory Vance was a ghost, a forgotten nightmare from Sarah's past, permanently neutralized by Xander's far-reaching influence. The world had been purged, meticulously cleansed, all for her. For Sarah, the weeks that followed were a journey of quiet healing and profound discovery. Under Xander's vigilant, unwavering care, the tremors in her hands subsided, the haunted look in her eyes slowly softened. She spent her days in her sun-drenched studio, restoring forgotten masterpieces, each brushstroke a testament to her renewed purpose. The physical comfort of the residence, once a gilded cage, now felt genuinely like home, a sanctuary built around her. One crisp autumn evening, Xander summoned her to his private study. The scent of old books and aged whiskey hung in the air, familiar and comforting. He stood by the expansive window, silhouetted against the twinkling Manhattan skyline, a formidable figure of quiet power. When he turned, his dark eyes met hers, holding an intensity that made her breath catch. There was no anger, no fury, only a profound, almost vulnerable depth. "Sarah," he began, his voice low, resonant, carrying a weight of unspoken emotion. "The world you knew, the threats that plagued you, they are gone. Permanently." He paused, taking a deliberate step towards her. "My promise was to protect you, to free you from the shadows. That promise has been fulfilled." Sarah's heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. She sensed a shift in the air, a momentous declaration hovering between them. "I know, Xander. You gave me my life back." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a rare, breathtaking sight. "More than that, Sarah. I claimed it. As I intend to claim our future." He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket and produced a small, velvet-covered box. Her gaze flickered to it, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't a ring box. He opened it, revealing not jewelry, but a single, meticulously crafted key, antique in design, gleaming gold. "This is the key to the Serafina Vance Art Foundation," he stated, his voice unwavering, his eyes fixed on hers. "A legitimate, ethical institution dedicated to discovering, preserving, and showcasing the works of forgotten artists. A sanctuary for true art, where talent is cherished, not exploited. It is located in the heart of the city, a space I have personally overseen its construction and curation. It will be run by you, under your full leadership. Your vision, your legacy." Sarah stared at the key, then at Xander, her mind reeling. A foundation. Her own. A sanctuary for artists like her, for the forgotten beauty she had always championed. It was beyond anything she had ever dared to dream. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unexpected. This wasn't just a job. It was a profound act of respect, a testament to his belief in her, a complete reclamation of her identity. "Xander," her voice was thick with emotion, barely a whisper. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he murmured, stepping closer, his hand reaching out to gently cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. His touch sent a shiver through her, a warmth spreading through her veins. "Say yes to a new beginning. Say yes to a life free of fear, free of debt, free of anyone's claim but my own." His eyes, dark and intense, held hers, a silent, unwavering vow of absolute devotion. "Say yes to us, Sarah." He leaned in slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Sarah found herself leaning into his touch, her gaze locked on his. She saw the unwavering promise in his eyes, the fierce, possessive love that had saved her from the abyss. She closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a tender, hesitant kiss that quickly deepened, becoming a desperate affirmation of everything they had found in each other. It was a kiss of healing, of promise, of absolute surrender and profound acceptance. Months flowed into a vibrant symphony of new beginnings. The Serafina Vance Art Foundation became a beacon of hope in the city's art scene, a testament to integrity and passion. Sarah blossomed, her confidence radiating, her vision bringing forgotten artists into the light. Xander, a silent partner in the truest sense, moved behind the scenes, ensuring the foundation's success, always her staunchest supporter. He often visited her there, watching her interact with artists, her face alight with purpose, a soft, possessive smile gracing his lips. Years later, the Mediterranean sun warmed Sarah's skin as she stood in the terrace of a secluded villa overlooking the azure sea. The scent of citrus and jasmine mingled with the salty air, a symphony of peace. Her laughter, light and unburdened, mingled with the playful squeals of two young children, a boy and a girl, chasing each other through the manicured gardens. Xander emerged from the villa, a rare smile softening the sharp angles of his face. He held a small leather-bound sketchbook in his hand, its pages filled with Sarah's vibrant sketches of their life here. He was still the imposing, meticulously dressed man, but there was a profound sense of contentment in his bearing, a lightness she had never thought possible. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. His chin rested on her shoulder, his gaze mirroring hers out at the endless expanse of the sea. "Our forever masterpiece," he murmured, his voice husky, his lips brushing her temple. Sarah leaned into his embrace, her hand reaching up to intertwine with his. "The one we built together," she agreed, her voice soft with overwhelming love. She remembered the abstract painting in his hidden gallery, the storm-tossed sea and the broken crown. That painting was still there, a reminder of the darkness they had overcome. But now, their lives were a canvas painted in vibrant, hopeful hues. He turned her gently in his arms, his dark eyes fixed on hers, holding a silent, unwavering vow. "No shadows here, Sarah. Only light. Only us." She saw it then in the depths of his gaze, not just possessiveness, but an ultimate devotion, an eternal claim forged in fire and healed by love. He had saved her, yes, but she had saved him too, leading him out of the darkness of his legacy and into the radiant light of a future they had chosen together. Their love, intense and unwavering, had not erased the past, but had irrevocably, beautifully rewritten their ending. They were each other's forever masterpiece, living a life of peace, security, and boundless happiness, bound by a love that had defied all odds. Isn't it true that sometimes the deepest scars hide the most beautiful strength? Sarah, once a fading masterpiece exploited and indebted, found herself in a trap, but it was a trap of unforeseen salvation. Xander Thorne, the formidable billionaire, didn't just rescue her. He systematically dismantled her tormentors, rebuilding her world around her unwavering talent and intrinsic worth. This isn't just a story of escaping shadows. It's a testament to a love so fierce, it sees your deepest wounds and declares them beautiful. Your past traumas don't define your destiny. You deserve a love that fights for you, heals you, and creates a sanctuary where your true self can finally shine. If this journey resonated with your soul, reminding you that you are worthy of profound protection and a brand new beginning, let us know. Like this video, subscribe for more tales of unbreakable devotion, and share your own affirmation below. I am cherished.